On a freezing night, in the middle of a blizzard, a wounded German shepherd emerged from the shadows, leading a homeless little girl straight into mystery that would shake an entire town. Was the terrible accident really just chance, or was it staged by someone hiding in plain sight? And how could courage, loyalty, and love turn two lost souls into a family? If it were you, standing in that moment, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And may your day be filled with warmth, hope, and gentle blessings. The winter in Ashford Ridge did not fall so much as it settled, like an old quilt laid across the shoulders of the town, the edges tucked beneath porch steps and split-rail fences, stitched with frozen creek lines and the dark seams of pine. Dawn arrived colorless and thin, and breath hung in the air like pale banners raised to a silent parade. Emily Carter, 9 years old and already fluent in the language of absence, tucked her fingers into fingerless gloves and counted the miracles of the morning: a scrap of heat from the bakery vent, a sun that at least showed its face, and a crust of yesterday's bread she had fished from the market's not-worth-selling bin. She was small for her age, wiry the way willow branches are wiry, meant to bend rather than break. Dust-brown hair, too bluntly cut by scissors, borrowed but not really borrowed, feathered her jawline, eyes the color of lake water before a storm made a habit of finding exits, shadows, opportunities, all at once. She wore a charcoal hoodie layered under a denim jacket 2 sizes too big, sleeves cuffed at the wrists, and thrift store sneakers gone salt white at the seams. If hunger is a teacher, hers had a patient voice and a stern curriculum. It taught her to look ordinary even when nothing in her life could claim that word. The market breathed like an old animal, each stall exhaling wood smoke and boiled coffee into the gray. A woman ladled soup in front of the VFW hall. A man in a knit cap sold oranges 1 degree this side of frostbitten. Mr. Halpern, the baker with an accent like warm butter, set a tray of rolls in the window and pretended not to see her noticing. "Nothing to throw away today," he said without looking up. Then he looked up and slid 1 small rye into a brown paper sack, as if his hands had made a mistake. Emily took the sack with a nod too solemn for 9. "Thanks," she said, because gratitude is a code, and she kept codes even when she had to break other rules to stay warm and breathing. She ate in modest bites because modesty makes food last longer, and because it felt polite to the bread to not watch it disappear. Across the street, a man leaned against a dented pickup, smoking the kind of smoke that didn't belong to early morning. He wore a dark jacket zipped high, a cap pulled low, and a posture that understood how to vanish in plain sight. Not tall, not short, the kind of build made for carrying lumber or other, heavier things. He watched nothing and everything, and when Emily shifted her weight, so did he, a mirror that had learned to move first. She felt the prickle at the base of her skull that said, "Memorize the face later. Forget the eyes immediately." She let the crowd swallow her and slipped down an alley lined with icicles sharp as a pew of glass prayer candles. She would normally turn north by the feed store and cut toward the drainage culvert, her path to the half-collapsed carriage shed behind the old depot where she slept. Except, sound tore through the hush like a wire snapping. It was not the loose-bone bark of backyard pets or the uncertain call of strays. It landed in the air with a trained, purposeful cadence, as if someone had taught the sound to carry meaning. Another bark, then the crackle of brush, and something broke free of the saplings by the railbed. The German shepherd emerged the way wounded heroes step into old epics. Not beautiful, not tidy, but undeniable. Black and silver coat muddied to the elbows, ice clinging to feathered fur along his belly, left ear nicked, as if some earlier fight had left a small, permanent question mark on his profile. He limped, but he limped with intention, and his amber eyes, bright, rimmed with frost, fixed on Emily the way a compass needle chooses north. He stopped 10 feet away, exhaled a white plume, and gave 1 sharp bark that felt less like noise and more like a sentence with only 1 verb. "Come." Emily had rules about following anyone or anything. They were taped to the inside of her skull like old warnings on electrical boxes. Do not touch, do not cross, do not assume. But rules have loopholes, and one of hers, discovered last winter, read, If an angel arrives disguised as a German shepherd, consider renegotiating. She crouched, not quite brave enough to reach out, but unwilling to signal fear, and took inventory in one sweep. Torn pad on the front right paw, a smear of dried blood on the flank that wasn't his. Breath steady but fast, the faint chemical tang of gasoline braided into his fur. He darted 2 steps back toward the tracks, looked over his shoulder, and barked again, softer, shorter, the hurry tucked inside it like a folded note. "I can't own you," Emily said, trying on humor like a scarf against the cold. "But I can borrow you for a minute." The German shepherd wheeled and moved with a quick 3-legged rhythm, head low, scenting the air. When she didn't immediately follow, he stopped and glared. There is, in fact, a glare reserved for creatures who know the right thing, and insist you do it too. Emily sighed the sigh of a person who understands how bad ideas dress themselves as destiny. She tucked the rye into her jacket, pulled the hood up, and slid after him, quiet as shoreline fog. The town fell away in increments. Clapboard, parking lot, chain-link fence, frost-stiff grasses, the palette shifting from storefront color to the deep, deep mineral grays of winter land. The railbed gave way to pine, and the pine thinned toward a service road, pocked with ancient tire ruts and newer tracks she didn't like the look of. In places, she could smell more gasoline where wind could not. She could also smell cedar, sharp, resin sweet, and she filed both scents in the mental cabinet labeled "Later, Important." Somewhere in the trees to her left, a crow told a story in syllables that sounded like laughter, if laughter were impatient. The German shepherd never looked back for long. His job was forward. When he did glance over his shoulder, Emily muttered, all right," and felt, without wanting to feel it, the tug low in her chest that means your heart is adjusting its course toward another living thing. "Rook," she said, testing the name in the cold. It fit the angles of his head, the way he moved like a chess piece that never forgets what it guards. "Okay, Rook. Lead." He approved with a blink that wasn't quite a blink. Rook broke the last curtain of scrub and stepped onto the service road's bend. Emily caught up, slid alongside the ridge of a berm, and saw the world come apart. A lodgepole pine lay felled across the road, where no saw marks showed. Its weight sunk into the crushed hood of a dark SUV, with a county crest half obscured by snow. The roof on the driver's side had caved, windshield shattered into glitter. Steam feathered up from the grill in mournful threads, the air around it humming with heat meeting winter. The smell of gasoline hit her hard enough to make a person step back, and she did, boots skidding on the crusted surface. Rook did not retreat. He rushed the driver's door, planted himself there, and issued a sound Emily would remember the rest of her life. Not bark, not howl, but the full-bodied refusal of a German shepherd to accept that a thing he loves has ended. Emily's vision channeled into a tight corridor. She took in what there was to take. Airbag burst like a white fist. A gloved hand clawed toward the steering column, as if reaching even after the world changed, and a man slumped against the weight of it. Mid-30s, maybe, light skin, close-cropped dark hair smashed damp against his head, stubble mapping his jawline, winter duty jacket zipped up to deflect a cold beyond just weather. A thin line of blood rode itself from temple to jaw, not fast, not slow. His mouth, slightly open, had the stunned shape of a person speaking before the recording cuts out. He was not any kind of father from Emily's history, and not any kind of stranger who had ever done her a favor, and still, there are ranks of urgencies that outrank personal biographies. Rook pressed at the door seam with his nose, then his shoulder, then pawed at the snow with a frustrated scrape, as if rearranging the ground would translate into opening the world. Emily moved without giving consent to herself. She slid to the passenger side. The window there had been knocked out, the frame set with jagged triangles of glass like dragon's teeth. She tore off her mitten and swept the frame with the sleeve of her jacket, hearing fabric complain, imagining later how to stitch it. Deciding now would have to apologize to later. She ducked inside. The cold tin smell of the airbag met the iron tang of blood and the old stink of reheated coffee from a tipped travel mug. The man's eyes flickered in a place between sleep and shock. "Hey," Emily said, steady enough for both of them. "Hey, sir, you're not alone." She didn't touch him because a rule she had overheard once at a shelter circled in her mind. Something about necks and spines and how not to make a bad thing worse. She scanned the center console for a radio because movies had taught her what real life had not. There it was, black, scuffed, coiled cord, stubborn as a snake. She tugged and it gave. The moment her hand touched it, something shifted in the pines, some weight of watching, and reflex told her to duck, and still she didn't. On the driver's side, Rook broke his voice into pieces, each one falling in the same place. Urgency. Urgency. Emily crawled backward, cradling the radio. The cold bit so efficiently she almost admired its professionalism. Snow spattered like salt across the console. A single pine needle clung to the officer's shoulder like a badge. She popped back out through the passenger window, boots thumping in the snow, and Rook was on her, nose at her wrist, then face tilted toward the tree line where the forest thickened into suggestion. She looked and saw nothing. She looked harder and saw a dark shape, a man's height and stillness, tucked in the pines where the mist turned everything to second drafts. The shape tilted its head as if to learn her outline. Then it bled backward into the trees, as if the woods had opened to let it pass. Emily's skin did that tightening thing it did in alleys with no lights. She lifted the radio with numbed fingers and pressed the button the way prayer presses its case, to whoever might be listening. Static fizzed. She tried again and got words this time. Crackling, official, a voice that sounded like it had practiced not panicking, even when panicking would be reasonable. Unit identify, the voice said, clipped, patient. Emily breathed once to test whether she still could. Not a unit, she said. A kid. There's a German shepherd. There's an officer. A tree fell or something made it fall. East of town, past the old rail bed. The car says county. He's breathing. Rook eased closer, pressed his shoulder to her thigh as if information could be transmitted through bone. Stay with him, the radio told her. Keep him warm. Don't move his neck. Help is coming. Emily looked toward the pines again and saw only the honest white of snow, the vertical archive of trunks, the honest lie of quiet. She folded her hoodie up to make a pillow, to wedge beneath the officer's head, and found, in the doing, that her hands didn't shake when work needed doing. Help is coming, she repeated to Rook, who didn't need the words but approved of their shape. I heard, she added, because humor sneaks in where fear expects to be alone. She set the radio beside her, reached into the SUV to cover the officer's chest with his jacket where it had bunched near his throat, and felt the warmth of his breath, too thin but undeniable, wash over her knuckles. In a different story, she might have run. This one, she stayed. The snow began again, fine as sifted flour, and the sound the world made changed, right there, in the small radius where a German shepherd, a girl with a code, and a man with a badge met under a tree that should not have fallen on its own. When the sirens finally stitched themselves into the distance, a thin thread at first, then bolder, Emily imagined for a moment what it would be to hand the scene back to adults, to walk away before questions learned her name. She also imagined Rook choosing the moment she left or stayed, and decided that if the old gods of winter had appointed her the girl on this road, then she could hold the line a little longer. She put her palm to Rook's chest to feel the drum there, fast and fierce. All right, she whispered to both of them, and maybe the trees. Stay with me. The sirens grew louder, and somewhere just beyond the first flash of light at the curve, the shape in the pines turned its face away. The sirens stitched themselves closer, until the white winter air trembled with the pulse of machines built for rescue. The echo carried down the forest road, fractured by pine trunks, broken and mended by the hush of snow. Emily Carter pressed her back against the SUV doorframe, the radio clutched in her small hands, her breath visible as small bursts of determination. Rook stood rigid beside her, his thick black and silver coat bristling despite the cold, his amber eyes burning toward the line of trees as though the forest itself were guilty. Inside the shattered frame of the cruiser, Officer Michael Hayes hung between unconsciousness and some half-formed instinct to rise. His head rolled against the deployed airbag, a faint groan escaping his lips. Not yet words, just proof he had not yet left. Stay with me, Emily whispered, both to him and to herself. She pressed the radio's button again, the plastic cold against her palm. Hello? The man's still breathing. He's moving a little. Please hurry. The dispatcher's voice, steady as the town clock toll, crackled back. We hear you, sweetheart. Units are closing in. Don't try to move him. Just stay close. Emily nodded, though they couldn't see her. She crouched lower, her denim jacket slipping from one shoulder. The rye bread forgotten in her pocket, now pressed flat against her ribs. The lights arrived first, red and blue dancing against the skeletal pines, painting the snow with uneasy brilliance. Then came the rumble of chains on tires, 2 SUVs forcing their way down the road, followed by a rescue truck with steel-cutting tools strapped to its side. The air thickened with exhaust and authority. Rook didn't move. He barked once, low, as if to announce that the territory had been his before theirs, and then yielded his post only enough to allow them passage. Doors slammed, boots cracked against the icy ruts, and the scene filled with purposeful voices. "Sergeant Hayes," a voice called. "Michael, can you hear me?" The name, new to Emily's ears, lodged itself in her memory. A woman in a high-visibility parka, her tall frame unbowed by the wind, stepped from the lead SUV. Beneath the unzipped coat gleamed the charcoal uniform of rank. Her face was pale from years in the mountain cold, eyes the steel blue of snow shadows, mouth set not in severity but in command. Lieutenant Claire Donovan moved with the precision of someone who had long ago learned that hesitation was the language of regret. She swept her gaze across the wreck, the blood, the child, and the German shepherd, and in one breath seemed to decide what belonged where. "Good work," she murmured, almost to herself, before raising her voice. "Caleb, Anna, on the tree, let's get him out." Emily blinked up at her. I found him," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush as though confession were an obligation. Claire crouched just enough to meet the girl's eyes. Up close, Emily could see the streaks of tiredness carved into the lieutenant's face, the faint scar along her jawline, the discipline in her posture. "And you called us," Claire answered, her voice even, but not unkind. "That means he's alive because of you. Now, let us do the rest." Emily's throat closed for a moment with something like pride and something heavier, the kind of weight that feels dangerous to carry when you don't know if anyone will help lift it later. While the rescuers set the hydraulic saw against the fallen lodgepole, Anna Fields, the medic with copper hair tucked under a wool cap, slid into the passenger side to reach Michael. Her hands moved fast and certain, checking pulse, bracing his neck, murmuring clinical words that sounded like spells. Consciousness shallow, breathing steady, probable concussion, blood loss moderate. Claire kept one hand against the SUV frame, leaning to look at her sergeant, and in her voice came both steel and softness. "Michael, stay with us. We're here." Emily, pressed back by the sudden flurry of adult efficiency, found herself watching Rook instead. The shepherd paced once, his limp visible but his energy unbroken, nose to the ground, as though measuring sense invisible to others. Twice he froze, hackles raised, eyes scanning the tree line. Both times Emily's own skin tightened, recalling the dark figure that had tilted its head in the mist. She wanted to tell Claire, but her tongue stuck against the roof of her mouth. What if they thought she had imagined it? What if telling made things worse? She pressed her lips together and waited. The saw bit into the trunk, sparks and splinters dancing against the falling snow. The sound was violent, mechanical, drowning the forest's silence. And yet, it was also relief, because it meant forward motion. Emily hugged her knees to her chest as she sat in the snow, watching the work unfold like a ritual. Minutes later, the log split enough to leave her free. With practice shouts, the crew braced, lifted, pulled. Michael Hayes was eased from the SUV onto a stretcher, his head carefully supported, a thermal blanket drawn over him as if covering a secret they refused to surrender. He stirred, gray-green eyes flickering open just long enough to catch a glimpse of the girl's small form crouched beside the shepherd. His lips parted in a shape that might have been thank you before the oxygen mask covered his mouth. Claire straightened, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Get him to County General," she ordered. Then her gaze shifted back to Emily. "Where are your parents?" The question came plain, necessary. Emily's chest tightened. She drew her knees closer and glanced at Rook. The shepherd's body pressed against her side, warm, present, protective. "Nowhere," she said finally, the honesty edged with defiance. Claire studied her for a heartbeat, the silence longer than a question, but shorter than an accusation. Then she nodded. Once, "We'll talk later. For now, you ride with us." As the stretcher was lifted into the medic truck, Rook limped forward, resting his muzzle briefly against Michael's gloved hand. A sound like a sigh escaped the injured officer, and the shepherd backed away, amber eyes never leaving the man as the doors shut. The convoy prepared to move, chains crunching on snow, engines growling against the cold. Emily stood awkwardly until Claire's hand touched her shoulder and guided her toward the warmth of the rear seat. "You did something brave today," the lieutenant said, fastening the seatbelt across her. "But keep this in mind. Sometimes what looks like an accident isn't." Her eyes, hard and clear, flicked once more to the shadowed trees. Emily followed the look, but saw only white mist and dark pine, empty yet not. Rook whined low, his ears trained on the same direction. The sound carrying meaning Emily didn't need translated. Something had started here that wasn't finished. The convoy rolled forward, cutting ruts into the snowbound road. Behind them, the forest closed again, the quiet swallowing the wreck as if erasing evidence. Emily pressed her forehead to the cold window, her reflection pale and young, and older than it should have been. Rook lay at her feet, his breath fogging the glass, his body trembling not with fear, but with vigilance. Michael Hayes was alive. Help had come. But Emily knew, in the marrow of her hunger-honed instinct, that the man in the trees would not vanish so easily. Some truths walk after you, some find your name even when you never gave it. The night after the rescue pressed down heavier than the snow itself, as if Ashford Ridge had drawn in a long, uneasy breath and was holding it. The convoy that carried Michael Hayes to County General left behind ruts that quickly filled with drifting white, erasing the passage of men and machines until only the hush remained. Yet Emily Carter, wedged in the back seat of Lieutenant Claire Donovan's SUV, with Rook's head across her lap, could not erase the image of the man in the trees. Even the rhythm of the windshield wipers felt like a reminder. Back and forth, appear and vanish, always watching. Claire drove with a calm that belonged to mountain law officers. No wasted movement, no unnecessary words. The faint light from the dashboard caught the lines of discipline carved along her face. She spoke once, not to fill silence, but to anchor it. "You were smart to stay," she said, her eyes never leaving the road. Emily didn't answer. Her hands were busy scratching gently behind Rook's torn ear, feeling the tremor beneath fur, both of them absorbing warmth from each other. The shepherd hadn't stopped scanning the windows, his amber eyes reflecting the occasional flash of headlights, his body taut with the sense that duty had not ended with the crash. At County General, the hospital swallowed Michael with fluorescent corridors and professional urgency. Emily only glimpsed his stretcher being wheeled past double doors, a mask over his mouth, an IV threaded into his arm. She had no place in that world of clipped orders and antiseptic brightness. So Claire guided her instead through the lobby, into the waiting area, where a woman sat with the kind of patience that belongs to school teachers and grandmothers. Ruth Miller was in her late 60s, silver hair cut short, a knitted scarf wrapped neatly around her neck. Her back carried a faint stoop, but her eyes, a clear hazel softened by years of reading faces, lifted immediately toward Emily with the unspoken welcome of someone who had practiced kindness as vocation. "This is Ruth," Claire said, crouching slightly to meet Emily's wary gaze. "She helps us sometimes when kids need a safe place." Emily's instinct was to recoil. Safe places had a way of turning into paperwork and strange beds. But Rook leaned his weight against her, nudging her forward as if he too approved. Ruth's voice was low and careful, not prying, not assuming. "You look cold, honey. Let's get you warmed up." She offered a blanket and a steaming cup of cocoa from the vending machine. The small luxuries of a world Emily had almost forgotten belonged to children. Emily wrapped her hands around the cup, but sipped slow, mistrust woven into her very gestures. Meanwhile, across the hospital wing, Michael Hayes fought through the fog of a concussion. The steady beep of machines tethered him to the present, but his mind kept slipping sideways into fragments. Trees rushing close against his windshield. The scream of metal as the pine collapsed, and before that, footsteps in the forest, voices low, the harsh tang of gasoline mixing with the sweeter resin of cedar. He remembered stumbling across a truck bed months earlier, tarps covering something too neatly stacked, the ledger he had found hidden beneath, names, payment routes, coordinates, and the one face that haunted him most, Caleb Voss, the disgraced foreman, his smirk caught in a photo Michael had taken with his phone, proof of something larger. Michael tried to sit upright, but pain stitched across his skull. The nurse pressed him back gently. "Rest. Memory will come in pieces," she said, but Michael's eyes were already narrowing. He knew enough to sense the tree across his cruiser had not been a storm's doing. Somewhere between memory and dread, he recalled a lighter flickering in the dark and the silhouette of a man watching. Not accident, but orchestration. Back at Ruth's small house, Emily sat by the fire Ruth had kindled in a stove older than Emily's lifetime. The crackle of wood was almost a lullaby, though her muscles refused to unclench. Rook lay stretched at her feet, his bandaged paw awkward but ignored, eyes fixed on the front door, as though daring it to open without permission. Ruth busied herself in the kitchen, humming some hymn Emily didn't recognize, filling the silence with warmth instead of questions. When Ruth finally sat down, she didn't interrogate. She simply began to knit, needles clicking steady as a metronome. "You don't have to tell me anything tonight," she said softly. "Sometimes the story comes later." Emily glanced at her, suspicion and gratitude warring. She wanted to believe the woman, but years of alleys and cold nights taught her that kindness could be another form of trap. Still, the blanket was warm, the cocoa rich, and Rook's presence an anchor. For one night, that was enough. But shadows are patient. Outside the frosted window, a figure lingered in the mist. Caleb Voss stood with his collar turned high, watching the house, memorizing the way the shepherd's silhouette shifted behind the curtain. He lit a cigarette, the glow briefly outlining his scarred jaw. He had already tested the girl at the market and knew her instincts were sharp. That made her dangerous. The officer had survived. The ledger still existed somewhere. Loose ends were not acceptable. He exhaled smoke into the night and stepped back into the trees, leaving no more trace than a bad dream. Inside, Emily stirred uneasily, as if some part of her small body understood when danger drew close. She pulled the blanket tighter, her hand resting unconsciously against Rook's fur. The shepherd opened one eye, growled low in his chest, and then lay still again, waiting for the next signal the world would send. Michael dreamed of cedar groves burning, of trucks groaning under stolen weight, of names whispered in logging camps where no law reached. Emily dreamed of alleys with no doors, of bread crumbling to dust in her hands. Rook did not dream. He listened. And Ashford Ridge, cloaked in snow and silence, held its secrets one night longer, while the threads of 3 lives began knotting themselves into a single story neither storm nor shadow would undo. The hum of County General was a music of its own, heels clicking against linoleum, machines beeping steady as metronomes, voices pitched in the controlled urgency of those who fight for life daily. Michael Hayes drifted in and out beneath the fluorescent wash, pain tethering him to the bed, but memory tugging him elsewhere. The bandage at his temple itched with each pulse of blood, reminding him he had survived, though survival felt like standing on a ledge with fog obscuring what lay beneath. Each time he closed his eyes, fragments rushed in like shards of glass. A logging truck grinding across frozen soil where no permits allowed, tarps tied too tightly to hide something. Caleb Voss's smirk as he flicked a lighter open and closed, the metallic scent of gasoline braided with cedar resin. He could almost hear voices muffled by trees, men speaking of shipments, of payments slid into envelopes, of maps marked with red ink. Then the crash, the thunder of wood splitting, the cold pressing against his ribs, as if the mountain itself had decided to punish him. The doctors told him rest was essential, but Michael knew rest was a lie that invited memory to cut deeper. He needed those memories, and he needed them whole, because if he did not put the story together, someone else, someone more ruthless, would write its ending. Across town, in Ruth Miller's modest home, the night moved slower, measured by the creak of the old stove and the soft clicking of knitting needles. Emily Carter sat curled on the couch beneath a quilt, patched from decades of fabric, her shoulders drawn tight, but her eyes following the rhythm of Ruth's hands. Trust was a currency she had rarely spent, and she guarded it the way misers guard coins, unwilling to surrender, unwilling to believe more could ever be earned. Yet warmth pressed its argument. The cocoa had been sweet, the blanket soft, the tone of Ruth's voice nothing like the clipped suspicion she had known from shelters. Rook lay sprawled near the door, his bandaged paw tucked awkwardly, his gaze never resting for long. He listened to every noise beyond the walls, the scrape of branches against the window, the far-off rumble of a truck, the low moan of the wind bending through pines. Twice he lifted his head, ears sharp, and once he growled so quietly that Emily nearly missed it. She slid closer to him, burying her fingers in his thick fur. "You heard it too," she whispered. The shepherd's amber eyes flicked toward her, confirming what she feared. The night was not empty. Ruth noticed but didn't press. She only set aside her knitting long enough to fetch another log for the stove, her hand steady despite the draft that rattled the old windows. "Sleep while you can, child," she said gently. "The world will ask more of you than it should. Tonight, let the fire ask nothing." Emily nodded, though her body refused to yield. She stretched out under the quilt, Rook pressed against her hip, and let her eyelids dip only halfway. She dreamed in fragments of alleys where smoke curled and men's eyes followed her too long, of hands offering food only to snatch it back, of voices that promised safety but delivered rules that felt like shackles. But between those fragments came something else. The moment Rook had appeared, limping, bleeding, demanding she follow. The bark had not been plea, it had been command, and for once she had listened. In that moment, obedience had meant salvation, and that thought soothed her until sleep finally claimed her. Outside, in the veil of mist that clung to the town's edge, Caleb Voss waited, his dark coat blended with the tree line, his cap pulled low, the ember of his cigarette the only betrayal of his presence. He watched the glow of Ruth's window, eyes narrowing each time the curtain shifted. He was not a man who believed in fate, but he believed in unfinished business. The officer had survived when he should not have, the girl had appeared where she should not have, and the German shepherd had complicated everything. Caleb had built a life on intimidation, on silencing those who asked questions, on making problems vanish into the wilderness. He would not let a child and a crippled dog unravel what he had invested years protecting. Still, he was patient. The night was long, and fear worked better when planted slowly. He flicked his cigarette into the snow, ground it out beneath his boot, and melted back into the forest, already plotting where he might cross the girl's path again. By morning, the storm had softened, leaving a thin veil of frost on the town's rooftops. Ruth hummed in the kitchen while eggs sizzled on an iron skillet, the smell both foreign and irresistible to Emily, who had grown accustomed to meals scavenged from dumpsters or discarded boxes. She sat at the table stiffly, Rook pressed to her leg, the shepherd's tail brushing the floor in lazy arcs, but his ears still cocked toward every sound. Ruth set a plate before the girl, without comment. Emily ate quickly at first, then slowed, embarrassed by her hunger. "You don't owe me anything for food," Ruth said simply. "A child eating is never debt." Emily studied her, trying to measure whether the words were bait. Ruth only smiled faintly, returning to her knitting as though the conversation had been unnecessary. At the hospital, Michael forced himself upright despite the nurse's protests. He scribbled on a legal pad with trembling hands, reconstructing names and places from memory. Caleb Voss, unmarked sawmill, ledger hidden under tarp, truck routes through federal land. He remembered stumbling onto that truck during a hike months ago, photographing it with his phone, the folder of evidence he had begun assembling. He also remembered losing the folder after a confrontation near the ridge, and the certainty that Caleb knew he had seen too much. Now, staring at his notes, he realized the crash had been no accident. Someone had cut that pine, timed it, staged it, and the one loose variable, the girl who had found him, was now in danger precisely because she had stumbled into his war. His jaw tightened. He had failed once before, arriving too late at another mountain wreck, lives lost, because hesitation had cost minutes. He would not allow failure to repeat. Ruth's doorbell chimed late that afternoon, the sound strange against the hush of snow. Emily stiffened, Rook rising instantly, a growl coiled in his throat. Ruth frowned, wiped her hands, and moved to the door. Standing there was a man in a delivery jacket, clipboard in hand, his smile practiced and warm. "Package for Ms. Miller," he said easily. "Need a quick signature." Ruth blinked, confused. "I didn't order—" But before she finished, the man leaned slightly, his eyes catching Emily over Ruth's shoulder. The smile widened just enough to feel wrong. Rook lunged forward, barking with the authority of a soldier, teeth flashing, body straining against the invisible leash of the doorway. The man stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Easy there, must have the wrong address." He tipped his cap, turned, and walked toward a truck idling at the curb, its license plate spattered with mud. Ruth shut the door firmly, her face pale. Emily clutched Rook's collar, feeling the shepherd's heartbeat hammering like a drum. She knew without words that the man had not been lost, and the package had never been his purpose. That night, Emily whispered into Rook's fur as they lay near the fire. "He's looking for me." The shepherd only pressed closer, his breath warm against her hand. She thought of Michael Hayes in the hospital, of Ruth's quiet kindness, of Claire's steel blue eyes reading the forest for danger. Somewhere in that fragile net of people and one wounded dog, she had found a place to belong. And precisely because of that, she feared Caleb Voss would not rest until he tore it apart. Snow drifted against the windows, covering footprints, erasing evidence, but Emily knew some shadows didn't need prints to follow. They found you anyway. And she resolved, in the hard marrow of her small frame, that if they came again, she would not run alone. The days that followed carried the deceptive stillness of fresh snow, the kind that looked clean until you dug beneath and found the frozen rot of branches and stones. Ashford Ridge moved on with its routines, shopkeepers scraping their stoops, children trudging to school with lunch pails, plows rumbling down Main Street. But beneath that rhythm, another pulse ran, uneven, darker. Emily Carter felt it most when she walked outside Ruth Miller's house to fetch wood for the stove, the air sharp enough to sting her lungs. Rook would follow, limping but insistent, nose low, ears swiveling toward every whisper of wind. Twice he stopped abruptly, growling at shadows that melted before Emily could confirm their shape. She had begun to recognize the pattern. Danger announced itself to the shepherd long before human senses caught up. Trust was difficult for her, but in Rook she had already surrendered a piece of herself. He was not just protector, but compass, always pointing to where the threat lay, even when unseen. Inside the hospital, Michael Hayes had grown restless. Doctors ordered rest, but rest meant time, and time meant Caleb Voss tightening his hold on the network Michael had stumbled across. He remembered the ledger now more clearly, names scrawled in columns, payments marked with crude X's, coordinates mapping shipments of stolen cedar hauled through federal land. He remembered Caleb's voice at a sawmill years back, mocking him for being the kind of officer who thought truth was stronger than silence. And he remembered the crash, the pine felled not by storm, but by design. When Claire Donovan visited his room, her uniform still dusted with snow, Michael wasted no words. It wasn't an accident. Caleb cut that tree. Claire studied him with her glacier blue eyes, the lines of responsibility etched deeper around her mouth. "I know," she said evenly, "but proof has a way of disappearing in this town. Trucks vanish, ledgers burn. If we're going to take him down, we'll need more than suspicion." Michael gripped the bed rail, his knuckles pale. "Then we find it, before he finds her." Claire didn't ask who. Both knew the girl was part of this now, whether she wanted it or not. Emily tried to keep her world small, but small worlds are fragile. One afternoon, Ruth sent her to the corner store, with a short list written in tidy script. Snowflakes clung to Emily's lashes as she walked, her boots crunching rhythmically. Rook pressed to her side like a shadow that breathed. The store smelled of dust and coffee grounds, aisles narrow and dim. She picked up bread, a tin of soup, and a box of tea, repeating Ruth's list like a charm to ward off distraction. At the counter, coins clinked, and she felt almost normal, but normal split the moment she stepped outside. A man leaned against the post near the street lamp, his jacket zipped high, cap pulled low. His posture was casual, but his eyes locked on her with a familiarity that froze her steps. "You dropped something," he said, holding out a folded piece of paper. His voice was warm, too warm, the way a snake might sound if it could speak. Rook bristled instantly. his body moving in front of Emily, a growl rumbling deep and dangerous. The man, Caleb Voss, didn't flinch. He crouched slightly, still holding the paper out. "It's okay, I'm a friend. I know where you're staying. Thought maybe you'd want to know about your folks." The words were bait, sharp as barbed wire wrapped in sugar. Emily's chest clenched. Her parents were a silence she carried like a scar. She shook her head sharply, but Caleb's eyes narrowed, sensing the hook had at least brushed her. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There are things Ruth won't tell you, things the cops won't either. Come by the mill tomorrow, you'll find answers." Rook erupted, lunging so hard the leash nearly tore from Emily's grip. His bark echoed down the snowy street, drawing eyes from storefronts. Caleb's face flickered with irritation, then smoothed into a smile too quick to be honest. "Suit yourself," he said, retreating with a mock salute. He blended into the mist at the corner, leaving only the folded paper fluttering in the snow. Emily bent to retrieve it, curiosity stronger than fear. Unfolding it, she saw a single word scrawled, "Orphan." The letters cut deeper than any threat. Rook barked once more, snapping the spell, and Emily crumpled the paper into her pocket, ashamed of the way her hand shook. By the time she returned to Ruth's, her heart pounded with a mixture of rage and longing. She said nothing, but Rook pressed his head into her side, as if telling her silence didn't erase danger. That evening, Claire visited Ruth's house, her presence filling the small kitchen with the weight of authority. She questioned Emily gently, but the girl remained tight-lipped, unwilling to confess the encounter, fearing the information might scatter into places she couldn't control. Ruth watched with a teacher's intuition, recognizing a child clinging to autonomy in a world that had stripped it too often. After Claire left, Ruth sat beside Emily by the fire, her voice soft. "There are men who thrive on secrets, child. They dangle half-truths like lanterns in the dark. But not every lantern leads to safety." Emily pretended not to hear, but in her pocket the paper felt like a coal that refused to cool. Rook growled again at the door that night, standing sentinel until dawn, his amber eyes fixed on the horizon. Meanwhile, Caleb paced in the hollow shell of the abandoned mill, his breath rising in angry plumes. He replayed the moment in his mind, the girl's hesitation, the flicker in her eyes when he mentioned her parents. He knew he had found the crack. Now it was only a matter of widening it. He had been underestimated before, by logging companies, by law enforcement, by anyone who thought rules were stronger than will, but he had survived by being patient, and patience was a predator's best blade. He lit another cigarette, the smoke curling toward the rafters, and whispered into the dark, "She'll come to me. Or, I'll come for her." The sound of his laughter echoed through the mill, brittle as breaking glass. At County General, Michael forced himself to stand, his body rebelling against weakness. He pulled on his coat, ignoring the nurse's protests, and walked the corridor slowly, each step an argument with pain. He paused at a window overlooking the town, watching smoke rise from chimneys, the snow catching light like powdered stars. He thought of the girl, Emily, and the shepherd that had refused to leave him. They had bought him time, and time was a currency he could not waste. He would not let Caleb Voss sink his claws into another child. Somewhere deep inside him, past the throbbing pain and the ache of failure, a vow formed, sharp and immovable. This time, he would not arrive too late. This time, the predator would be the hunted. The winter sun was already sagging behind Ashford Ridge when Emily found herself walking the narrow back lanes near the edge of town, Rook padding close, his limp pronounced, but his determination unbroken. Ruth had sent her with a small errand, a jar of preserves to deliver to a neighbor 2 blocks down. But Emily, restless and wired with thoughts she couldn't silence, strayed further. She told herself it was only to stretch her legs, to give Rook air, but truth stirred underneath. The folded paper in her pocket still burned with the word orphan. Caleb Voss's voice echoed like smoke in her chest. "I know where you're staying. Come to the mill. You'll find answers." Answers were dangerous things, but when you've been starved of them, even poison can look like bread. Rook caught her hesitation long before she admitted it. He nudged her hip with his muzzle, his amber eyes saying what he could not. "Don't." Still, Emily's feet moved toward the freight yard, the place kids whispered about but never dared cross. Old boxcars rusted under snow, rails half buried, weeds stiff and brown. She ducked between two cars, pulled forward by a sound she told herself she only meant to identify. Voices, low, muffled, drifted through the air. She crouched, Rook instantly pressing himself beside her, his ears sharp as knives. Through a crack in the warped siding of a storage shed, she saw him, Caleb, pacing, a phone pressed to his ear, the faint glow of a lighter flicking open and shut between his fingers. His posture carried the same patience she had seen at the store, but his words were stripped of any disguise. "The cop's still breathing," he muttered, the lighter snapping shut, smoke curling from his lips. "I told you the pine would do it. He got lucky. But luck doesn't last. The files are gone. Yes, I burned them. What's left sits at the old mill, and tonight it ends. No ledgers, no witnesses, no Shepherd playing hero. That girl? She won't be a problem much longer." The words cut sharper than any blade. Emily's breath caught, her ribs aching from holding still. She glanced at Rook. The Shepherd's entire frame was quivering, not from fear, but from the restraint of silence, the instinct to attack checked only by her small hand buried in his fur. Caleb turned suddenly, his face angled toward the siding, and Emily jerked back, heart racing. She pressed herself against the icy rail, Rook blocking her with his body, as though his bulk alone could hide her. Caleb muttered into the phone again, then strode out of the shed, boots crunching on gravel. Emily dared a look. He was heading west, toward the tree line that led directly to the sawmill. Rook growled low, but she clamped his muzzle gently, whispering, "Not yet. Not here." Only after Caleb vanished into the mist did she release the breath she'd been holding. Her knees buckled, and she crouched in the snow, her pulse drumming in her ears. The truth was worse than she had imagined. Michael's crash had been planned, his death meant to erase evidence, and she herself was marked as another loose end. For the first time, she wanted desperately to run, not away, but toward someone, toward Michael, toward Claire, toward the people who might make sense of this. She tightened her grip on Rook's collar. "We can't hide it anymore," she whispered. "We have to tell." That same evening, in the quiet of County General, Michael sat propped against pillows, his uniform folded on a chair nearby, his notepad open across his lap. His head throbbed, but his mind was sharper, memory knitting fragments into clarity. He had written Caleb's name in heavy strokes, underlined twice. He had sketched a crude map of the ridge, marking the sawmill where trucks had been sighted, where he had once glimpsed crates stenciled with false company logos. He recalled the look in Caleb's eyes when confronted months earlier. Not fear, not even anger, but amusement, as if Michael had been a child tugging at a giant's sleeve. That amusement had become a tree across his cruiser, a concussion, and nearly death. When Claire entered, snow glittering across her shoulders, Michael wasted no time. "The sawmill," he said. "It's his ground. That's where he's covering tracks." Claire crossed to the window, arms folded, her profile sharp against the pale wash of moonlight. "I've thought the same," she admitted. "Reports of trucks moving through there at night. No permits, no records, and now you alive when you shouldn't be." She turned, her blue eyes piercing. "If we don't strike first, he'll try again." Michael's jaw tightened. "Then we strike." Emily arrived at Ruth's house breathless, her cheeks red, her words tumbling. Ruth set aside her knitting instantly, her concern sharper than reprimand. Rook paced, barking once, then twice, his eyes still locked on the direction they had come. Emily's story spilled out, fractured but clear enough. Caleb on the phone, the confession, the mention of the sawmill, the threat against her. Ruth's face paled, but she wasted no time. She picked up the telephone with the steady hands of a woman who had dealt with emergencies all her life, dialing the sheriff's department. Claire answered, and soon the pieces clicked. Michael's suspicions, Emily's overheard words, the map that pointed to the same destination. Within the hour, Claire was at Ruth's doorstep, her uniform dark against the snow, her presence bringing both relief and a fresh wave of fear. She knelt to Emily's level, her voice low. "You did the right thing telling us, but you need to be careful now. Caleb won't forgive being overheard." Emily nodded, though her throat tightened. She felt the weight of her own smallness, her lack of power, but Rook pressed against her, his amber gaze saying what Claire's words could not. She was not alone. Later that night, as the wind sharpened and the pines bent, Caleb stood in the sawmill, phone pressed to his ear, a grin slicing across his face. He had not seen the girl at the yard, but he felt her presence in the air, the way predators feel prey nearby. Tomorrow, he muttered into the dark. Tomorrow it ends. He hung up, tossed the phone onto a crate, and lit another cigarette. Around him, stacks of cedar planks leaned precariously, crates of contraband stashed under tarps. The mill smelled of resin and gasoline, of history rotting into crime. He didn't hear the growl carried faintly by the wind outside, the sound of a German shepherd vowing silently that the hunt would not be his alone. The storm arrived before dawn, rolling down from the mountains like an army of ghosts. By mid-morning, the town of Ashford Ridge was swallowed in white, streets buried, roofs sagging under heavy drifts. The church steeple blurred into a smear of gray. The wind howled with a voice that seemed to come from another world, rattling windows and bending the pine trees to breaking. For most, it was a day to stay inside, to stoke fires and wait. But storms do not stop predators. Sometimes they serve as their camouflage. Emily Carter stood at the small window of Ruth Miller's house, the frost painting ferns across the glass. She hugged Rook's thick neck, pressing her cheek to the warm fur. "Feels like the world's ending out there," she whispered. Rook licked her hand, his tail thumping once, but his ears stayed stiff, his muscles coiled with an unease Emily could not name. Ruth fussed in the kitchen, muttering about soup and bread, but beneath her words was a tension she could not hide. Since Emily's confession about overhearing Caleb, Ruth had not left the doors unlocked, not even during daylight. Still, no lock feels enough when you know a wolf has fixed his eyes on you. The knock came soft at first, 2 taps and a pause, almost polite. Emily turned, frowning. Ruth wiped her hands, walked to the door, calling, "Who is it?" No answer. Only the storm's scream. She hesitated, then opened it a crack. Snow swirled in, and standing there was a man in a delivery cap, his shoulders powdered with white. "Package for Ms. Miller," he said, voice honeyed. The clipboard in his hand looked official enough, but Rook lunged forward before Ruth could speak, teeth bared, growl ripping the air. The man's eyes flicked down, then up to Emily, and in that instant, the mask dropped. Caleb Voss shoved the door wide, striking Ruth backward, his other arm snatching Emily with terrifying precision. She screamed, twisting, but his grip was iron. Rook hurled himself at him, jaws locking on Caleb's sleeve, tearing fabric and flesh. Caleb snarled, half dragged, half battling the dog. In fury, he slammed his elbow into Rook's skull. The shepherd staggered, dazed, yet lunged again, clamping down harder. Caleb kicked savagely, and Rook fell with a yelp that pierced the storm louder than thunder. "Stay down, mutt!" Caleb hissed. He hauled Emily through the snow, her boots scraping, her fists pounding uselessly against his chest. Ruth cried out, struggling to rise, but Caleb had vanished into the white, swallowed by the storm, with Emily in his grip. Rook lay gasping, blood staining the snow around his muzzle. His body trembled, but his spirit did not yield. He forced himself upright, head spinning, and began to limp toward the tracks Caleb left behind, each paw print filling quickly with snow. The shepherd pressed on, leaving a crimson trail behind him, but his gaze never wavered from the path ahead. Loyalty burned hotter than pain. At County General, Michael Hayes felt the storm before he saw it. Snow pressed against the hospital windows, muting the world. He had been pacing despite orders to rest, his body too restless, too alive with purpose. When Claire Donovan burst into his room, her face pale and grim, he knew. "He took her," she said, wasting no words. Ruth called it in. He came for the girl. Michael's stomach turned to stone. He yanked on his coat, ignoring the pull of his healing ribs. "Where?" "Toward the sawmill," Claire answered, pulling a map from her pocket. "The storm covers his tracks, but if he means to finish this, that's where it ends." Before Michael could respond, claws clicked against tile. Rook staggered into the room, soaked, limping, muzzle bloodied, his amber eyes locked on Michael with desperate intensity. He barked once, short, sharp, then turned toward the door, pausing only to ensure they followed. Michael dropped to one knee, cupping the shepherd's head. "Good boy," he murmured, voice breaking. "Lead us." Claire grabbed her radio, calling for backup. But static devoured her words. The storm was too heavy. They were on their own. They left in Claire's SUV, chains clattering on tires, headlights carving tunnels through the white. Rook stood braced in the back seat, nose pressed to the glass, growling whenever the vehicle veered from Caleb's invisible trail. The storm beat against the windows, trying to swallow them whole, but Michael's grip on the dash was steady. "He won't stop, Claire. He thinks killing her erases the last witness." Claire's jaw clenched. "Then we don't let him. Not tonight." Her blue eyes never left the blizzard, scanning for the faintest sign of the road. The silence between them was thick, broken only by Rook's growls and the storm's rage. Meanwhile, Emily fought inside the cab of Caleb's truck. He had bound her wrists with rope, shoving her against the seat. The cab reeked of gasoline and smoke, his presence suffocating. "Why me?" she cried, her voice ragged. Caleb laughed, a sound without joy. "Because you saw what you shouldn't, because you think a mutt and a broken cop can save you. But in this world, girl, only the strong decide who matters." Emily spat at him, fury flaring through her fear. "Then you'll never matter." For a heartbeat, his mask slipped, rage flashing like lightning. He backhanded her, not hard enough to silence her spirit, but enough to remind her of his power. "We'll see who matters," he hissed. His truck ground up the snowy trail, tires clawing at ice, until the black silhouette of the sawmill loomed from the storm. He dragged her inside, the building groaning under the wind, rafters creaking like dying trees. He shoved her into a chair, bound her ankles, and lit a lantern. Its glow revealed crates stenciled with company names that no longer existed, planks stacked like gravestones. Caleb paced, pulling a crowbar from the wall. By the time the storm clears, nothing will be left. Not the mill, not the files, not you. Back on the road, Michael's eyes caught the faintest flicker through the trees, a glow too steady to be stormlight. "There," he said. Claire slowed, maneuvering off the road. The SUV jolted over roots, then stopped. "We go on foot," Claire said, grabbing her sidearm. Michael nodded, pulling a flashlight. Rook leapt down, landing stiff but resolute, nose instantly to the ground. They followed his lead, trudging through drifts waist-deep, wind slicing their faces. Every step was war, but every step was closer. Michael's lungs burned, his head throbbed, but his focus never broke. Not this time. Not another child lost to hesitation. At the sawmill, Emily watched Caleb stack planks near the lantern, pouring kerosene across the wood. The smell burned her throat. "They'll come for me," she said, forcing her voice steady. Caleb smirked. "Let them. The fire will take all of us. Sometimes the only way to erase a problem is to burn it clean." He struck a match, the flame tiny, yet terrible. Emily's heart thundered. She closed her eyes, whispering a single word. "Rook." Outside, through the storm's howl, she thought she heard a bark answering her prayer. The shepherd burst first through the door, a storm of fur and fury, his bark shaking the rafters. Behind him came Michael and Claire, weapons ready, eyes blazing. Caleb dropped the match, cursing, the flames snuffed by snow gusting through the broken boards. For the first time, the predator looked uncertain. For the first time, he realized the hunt was no longer his alone. The sawmill roared with the storm's breath, every board rattling, every rafter groaning like a dying giant. Caleb Voss stood in the lantern's glow, crowbar clutched tight, his shadow jagged against the wall. The crates stacked high behind him smelled of pine resin and kerosene, the whole place trembling on the edge of combustion. Emily sat bound to a chair, her small frame stiff with terror, but her eyes, defiant, burning, tracked him without blinking. She had promised herself she would not cry. Caleb's grin was a knife in the dim light. "Took you long enough," he sneered at Michael and Claire as they entered, weapons drawn, Rook braced in front of them like a living shield. "I should have killed you clean, Hayes. Should have finished the job when that pine fell. But maybe fate wanted it this way. Me and you, no badge, no courtroom. Just the storm, the fire, and who's left standing." Michael steadied his flashlight in one hand, the other flexing near his holstered weapon. "You staged it? You wanted me dead." Caleb's laugh cracked like dry timber. Dead men don't testify. Dead men don't dig too deep. But you crawled back, dragging mutts and orphans into the mess. So now I wipe the slate clean. He lunged forward, swinging the crowbar. Rook met him mid-stride, jaws locking onto Caleb's forearm. The man roared, slamming the dog against a crate, but Rook held fast, teeth sinking deeper despite the blood streaking his muzzle. Claire moved, weapon raised, but Caleb twisted, dragging the shepherd with him like a living anchor, keeping Claire's shot blocked. Michael dove left, rolling behind a stack of planks. "Emily!" he shouted. "Hold on!" She jerked against her ropes, skin burning where the fibers cut, desperate to free herself. Caleb kicked savagely, finally shaking Rook loose. The shepherd hit the ground hard, yelping, but within seconds he rose again, growled deeper, a guttural vow. "Not while she breathes." Caleb swung the crowbar at Claire, steel whistling past her head. She ducked, struck his wrist with the butt of her pistol, and the weapon clanged to the floor. Caleb staggered but recovered, grabbing a kerosene can, flinging liquid across the floor. The fumes hit like poison, acrid and suffocating. "We all burn tonight," he screamed, lighting another match. Emily shrieked, thrashing harder. The ropes bit into her skin, but she twisted, until one wrist slipped free. The match flared in Caleb's fingers, and for a heartbeat, the whole world froze, the tiny flame dancing, the fumes waiting like a predator. Then Rook launched, his body colliding with Caleb's chest. The match flew from his grasp, hissing out against the wet snow, blowing through broken boards. Caleb cursed, hammering his fist into the dog's ribs. Michael seized the moment, charging forward. He slammed into Caleb, driving him back into the crates. The wood groaned, toppled, spilling contraband across the floor. The fight became a storm within the storm, steel crowbar against bone, fists against will. Claire dragged Emily free, cutting the last of the ropes with her knife. "Run!" she urged, but Emily shook her head fiercely. "Not without Rook!" She dropped beside the shepherd, shielding him with her small frame, as if she could absorb the blows meant for him. Rook licked her cheek once, eyes half-lidded, but spirit unbroken. Claire's chest tightened. This girl, this dog, they had become more family in weeks than some people knew in a lifetime. Caleb shoved Michael back, blood dripping from his lip, eyes wild. "You think you can stop this? I've built it for years. Every crate, every ledger, every deal. Ashford Ridge lives on my back." Michael spat blood, his voice steady even through the roar of his heartbeat. "Number Ashford Ridge survives in spite of you." He swung hard, his fist connecting with Caleb's jaw. The man stumbled, only to slam Michael into the wall, the crowbar pressed against his throat. Michael's vision blurred, stars dancing, his windpipe screaming for air. Caleb's grin widened, sweat and snow mixing on his skin. "Say goodbye, Hayes." The gunshot cracked like thunder. Claire's bullet ripped through the crowbar, sparks flying as steel clanged against the ground. Caleb staggered, stunned. Michael gasped, shoving him back. Rook rose, staggering on shaky legs, then hurled himself one last time, teeth closing on Caleb's calf. The man screamed, collapsing to one knee. Emily scrambled forward, clutching the fallen crowbar with both hands. For a moment, her small frame shook under its weight, but fury steadied her arms. With a cry that was half sob, half roar, she swung. The blow struck Caleb's shoulder, sending him crashing sideways into a stack of planks. The wood avalanched, burying him in a rain of splintered pine. Silence fell, broken only by the storm rattling the roof. Michael stumbled forward, wrenching the crowbar from Emily's trembling hands. He dropped it aside, pulling her close. "It's over," he said, voice hoarse. Claire approached, weapon still steady, eyes locked on the mound of wood. "Not until he's cuffed." Together they dragged Caleb from the wreckage, broken but breathing, his eyes filled with venom that no defeat could drain. Claire snapped the cuffs around his wrists, her tone like stone. "You're finished, Voss. The storm ends for you tonight." Outside, the blizzard began to ease, the wind shifting into sighs instead of screams. Lantern light flickered across Emily's face as she hugged Rook, tears soaking into his fur. Michael knelt beside them, stroking the shepherd's neck. "You saved us all, boy," he whispered. Rook's tail thumped weakly, his amber gaze softening as though he understood. Claire keyed her radio again. This time the signal cut through, rescuers answering across the static. Help was on the way. Emily leaned against Michael, exhausted but alive, her hand never leaving Rook's fur. In the distance, the courthouse bells tolled midnight, each note ringing like a promise. The dark had broken, and dawn was on its way. Spring did not arrive in Ashford Ridge all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shy guest, letting the snow melt in rivulets along the gutters, coaxing green from the hard earth one blade at a time. By late March, the courthouse stood solid and somber against a sky washed clean of storm clouds. The townsfolk filled its halls, their murmurs hushed with a weight that had lingered since the night of the sawmill. Emily Carter sat in a small room off the main chamber, her legs swinging nervously above the floor. She wore a simple dress Ruth Miller had mended for her, the hem uneven but clean, and her hands toyed with the edge of a ribbon Ruth had tied in her hair. On the chair beside her, Rook lay curled, his sable coat gleaming after weeks of careful tending at the veterinary clinic. His limp had lessened. Though a scar tugged along his flank, his spirit was unscarred. When Emily's hand trembled, he pressed his muzzle against her palm, grounding her with quiet faith. In the courtroom, Michael Hayes took the stand. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, but the faint line of healing scars across his temple whispered of battles survived. He spoke plainly, his voice carrying steady as he recounted Caleb Voss's ambush, the staged accident, the crates of smuggled timber, and the night at the mill when the storm bore witness to violence and courage alike. Claire Donovan followed, her testimony cutting precise as glass, her eyes unwavering when the defense tried to bend her words. The jury listened, their faces grave. When Emily was called, the room seemed to hold its breath. She rose slowly, clutching Rook's leash. Judge Margaret Ellsworth, a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes like tempered steel, gave a small nod of reassurance. Emily sat, her feet barely brushing the floor. She spoke softly at first, but her voice gained strength with every word. She told them about the night Caleb came, about the ropes biting her wrists, about the match he lit to burn everything down. And she told them of Rook, how he never gave up, how his growl had been her anchor in the dark. When she finished, silence hung heavy. Then Judge Ellsworth inclined her head. "Thank you, Miss Carter. You've been very brave." The defense tried to claw at shadows, suggesting coincidences, claiming entrapment, but the truth was a mountain, immovable. The jury's deliberation was brief. "We, the jury, find the defendant Caleb Voss guilty on all counts," the foreman read, his voice resolute. "Attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, smuggling." The words rang like hammer blows. Caleb sat at the defense table, broad shoulders shrunken, his once defiant eyes now pools of bitter defeat. Judge Ellsworth's sentencing was unflinching. "Caleb Voss, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court finds your actions deliberate, ruthless, and destructive. May this judgment bring closure to those you have harmed, and a measure of peace to this community." Her gavel struck wood. The chapter of Caleb's reign over Ashford Ridge ended with a final, echoing crack. Outside, on the courthouse steps, relief broke over the town like sunlight through cloud. Reporters jostled for quotes, but Claire blocked them, shielding Emily and Rook with her tall frame. Michael stood nearby, his breath steaming in the cool air, his hand steady on Emily's shoulder. "It's done," he murmured. Emily looked up at him, the first true smile in months touching her lips. Yet justice was only one part of healing. The deeper wound was belonging, and whether she had it. For weeks, Ruth Miller had taken Emily in, feeding her, tucking her in beside the fire, treating her like kin. But Ruth was old, her steps slower with each day. She confessed one evening, tears in her eyes, that she feared she could not give Emily what she needed long-term. That was when Michael and Claire made their decision. Paperwork, interviews, home visits. It stretched across months, but Michael was relentless. Claire, too, stood beside him, her sternness softening whenever Emily entered the room. "She deserves more than survival," Claire said one night as they filled out forms. "She deserves a family." Michael nodded, his gaze drifting to Rook, snoring by the hearth. Then that's what we'll give her. By summer, the adoption was finalized. In the judge's chambers, quieter than a courtroom, warmer than an office, Emily signed her name with a hand that shook but did not falter. Michael signed next, his signature firm, his eyes bright with something unspoken. Claire added hers as co-guardian. When it was done, Judge Ellsworth smiled. Not her courtroom smile, but something gentler. "Family," she said simply. Outside the courthouse, the air was alive with bird song. Emily ran into the courtyard, Rook bounding after her, his tail high, his bark joyful. She turned, arms wide, and he barreled into her, nearly knocking her off her feet. Michael laughed, truly laughed, for the first time since before the accident. Claire shook her head, smiling despite herself. That night, they returned not to Ruth's small house, but to Michael's home at the edge of town. The porch light glowed golden against the dark, the smell of pine drifting through the open windows. Inside, the walls bore framed photos of Michael's years in service, now joined by a new picture, Emily grinning with gap-toothed joy, Rook's ears lopsided beside her. Dinner was simple, roast chicken, fresh bread, a pie Ruth had insisted they take, but it tasted like feast. Emily sat between Michael and Claire, her chair no longer the extra one dragged from storage, but a seat meant for her. She leaned against Michael's arm, whispering, "Is this home now?" He looked down, eyes soft. "Yes, Emily, this is home. For good." Later, when the stars spilled silver across the valley, Emily climbed into bed with Rook curled at her feet. The German shepherd sighed deeply, content. Emily whispered into his fur, "We made it, didn't we?" His tail thumped in reply. Across the hall, Michael leaned against the doorframe, watching with quiet awe. Claire joined him, her hand brushing his. "From ashes to light," she said softly. Michael nodded. "And from strangers to family." The town of Ashford Ridge healed slowly, but it healed. The sawmill was dismantled, its ruins cleared. Wildflowers grew where planks once rotted, turning the scarred clearing into a meadow of color. People spoke of the storm as if it had been the valley's trial, and the girl, the dog, and the weary officer had been its answer. And in the end, it was true. Miracles do not always come as thunder or flame. Sometimes they arrive in the shape of a shepherd's loyalty, a girl's courage, or the quiet decision of two souls who choose to open their hearts. On the porch of their home, Michael, Claire, Emily, and Rook watched the sun sink behind the mountains, the air rich with the promise of tomorrow. Rook barked once, sharp and proud, as if to remind them all that he would always keep watch. Emily slipped her small hand into Michael's, and he squeezed it gently. For the first time in years, Michael Hayes felt whole. For the first time in her life, Emily Carter felt safe. And for Rook, the shepherd who had carried them through storm and fire, it was simple. His family was here, and where they went, he would always follow. In the end, this story reminds us that miracles are not always grand or loud. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a loyal dog who refuses to give up, a child's courage in the darkest moment, or the kindness of strangers who choose to become family. These are not accidents. They are God's gentle ways of reminding us that He is always present, guiding us through storms into light. As we go through our own daily struggles, may we open our eyes to the small miracles around us, an act of kindness, a word of encouragement, or the simple gift of another sunrise. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may also find hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if you believe in the quiet miracles of God, write Amen below. Do not forget to subscribe to join our community of compassion, courage, and faith. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you today and always.